Hello and welcome back. I'm really glad that you're here. For this week's episode, I am combining a few different phrases or concepts that I think are really important for our kiddos to be able to communicate. And these came from things that have happened in my life recently and just helped me realize that these three things that I want to talk about today go really well together. And so I realized I could make one episode and talk about all three of them and hopefully give some strategies and suggestions and ideas on how to help our kiddos navigate each one of these. So what we're talking about this week is three things that I feel like are crucial for our kids to be able to communicate to other people. One of them is saying no. One of them is admitting when they don't know something. And one of them is asking for help. These all can fall under the general topic of self-advocacy, which is something that's really important to me. I've talked about it on the podcast before, but all of these topics fall under that general umbrella category of self-advocacy. So I want to share why I'm talking about each one of these, kind of where they're coming from, how I teach them to the students in my program at Starfish Social Club, and how you can teach and support your kiddos at home with these skills as well. So that's our plan for today. I'm going to start with the concept of saying no. And I know that this one may be a little bit controversial. In my opinion, allowing our kids to say no is a significantly important life skill. I think having a goal of raising compliant kids sets them up to be people pleasers, sets them up for the potential to be in dysfunctional relationships as adults, sets them up to not be able to self-advocate, and can really contribute to some mental health challenges. I am not a big fan of the concept of compliance. I know a lot of the students that are in my program because their parents intentionally choose not to call out any other types of programs, but intentionally choose my program over methods and models that are more compliance-based, because my program is not compliance-based at all. I joke with the kids that they can lie on the floor for an hour if they want to. They can have their camera off the whole time if they want to. My goal is never to get kids to comply or conform or to do what I say. That is not at all what I am trying to create in the world. And that's definitely not how I show up in the world. If you know anything about my childhood, I was a very non-compliant, non-conforming child. And so obviously some of that is still in the mix as I am now an adult. So the concept of saying no has always been an important thing for me, that our kids are able to learn how to say no and that they are supported in saying no. Now, I remember many years ago, maybe 15 years ago, I had a student when I was working in the school system, and his language was pretty limited. He was only able to say some, common phrases and words pertaining to what he needed. But one of the things that he could say was, no, thank you. And so he would say, no, thank you, pretty much anytime somebody asked him to do something or presented him with a task or an expectation. I can still hear his voice. No, thank you. No, thank you. And a lot of people were kind of annoyed and frustrated that he had learned this phrase. I thought it was amazing. I was actually really pleased that somebody had put in the time and the effort to teach him how to say no, especially a kiddo like him who had very limited communication strategies and skills. We don't want our kids to be in situations where they feel uncomfortable, or they don't want to do something, or they're trying to advocate for themselves, but they've been taught that it's not okay for them to say no. We do not want those kinds of situations for our kids. And I'll share a story behind the reason why I'm even talking about this today. Why is this even on my brain today? About 10 days ago, I went to the town that I now live in. I went to the zoo at the town that I live in now. I'm a huge animal lover. Anytime I'm in a town with a zoo, I will be there. Zoos, aquariums, all that kind of stuff. So I was at the zoo, and I think I was in the reptile house, and there was this part of the exhibit that was a kind of a smaller room, and it had doors to other sections of the exhibit. And in this one room, there was a young child in a stroller, and I couldn't see them, but I could hear them because it's a little girl, and she was crying, very upset about something. And I could tell that she wasn't a baby. She was old enough to have, minimal communication skills. And she was crying. She was very upset about something. It was already going on when I entered the space, so I don't know what had happened. But when I was in the space, her father was leaning over her in the stroller and trying to redirect her and trying to get her to stop crying. And when I left the room, he and his child, and I believe there was a mother in the picture too, they were the only people left in that room when I left and went to another section. But I had just gone through a door. I could still hear them. And as soon as I left, he started yelling at her. And what he was yelling at her was, "Don't you say no to me. It is not okay for you to say no to your father." And this is what he was yelling at his small child. He was telling her that it was unacceptable for her to tell him no because he was her father. And I have to say, I had a really difficult time deciding whether to let that be because it's not my business, or whether to go back into that room and insert myself into the situation and express my concern over this person raising his child in a way that did not allow her to say no. And I ultimately chose to let it go, because I did not feel like he was in a position to be receptive to the advice of a stranger. Sometimes I will support strangers in random places if I see that they're struggling with their kiddos. And sometimes I don't feel like they're in a position to be receptive to my support. And this was one of those times where I felt like he would not be receptive to me telling him kind of, how I felt and my concern about him basically his child was getting in trouble for telling him no. That's basically what was happening. And I think it took me back to when I was little, and feeling like I was always in trouble. And I felt myself in this little girl. And so it was a really difficult situation for me, both to be exposed to and to walk away from. And so that's why I added that to the list of things to talk about today. it goes back to what I was saying about that parent's goal was to raise a compliant child. But compliant kids are often the ones who are struggling with things like depression and anxiety. They're struggling with people pleasing. They're struggling with not being able to tell people what they want or what they need. They, as I mentioned, they are more at risk of ending up in dysfunctional relationships because they have not developed the ability to self-advocate and to stand up for themselves and to leave situations that make them feel uncomfortable because they've been told that they're not allowed to say no. They're not allowed to express their needs. They're not allowed to tell people what they think and how they feel. So for our kiddos, it's so important to me, number one, that they learn how to say no, and number two, that they're allowed to say no. If your kiddo doesn't want to go somewhere, doesn't want to do something, doesn't want to eat something, doesn't want to hug somebody during the holidays, that's a big one that comes up every year, is, some of our kids don't want to be hugged, and that should be absolutely acceptable. They should be allowed to have autonomy over their body. A kiddo who is telling other people no is not doing so to be defiant or to be disruptive. They're doing so because they are overwhelmed or they're uncomfortable or there's something about the situation that they feel like they don't want to be part of or that they can't handle. And I know that part of the concern is that kids will overuse being able to say no. It does not mean that when they say no, we automatically remove the expectation. It doesn't have to mean that we allow them to call the shots, so to speak. But it does mean that if your child says no to something, we need to figure out why. Why is that child saying no to this thing? There's a reason for it. And as I mentioned just a minute ago, maybe they're overwhelmed. Maybe they are overstimulated. Maybe they're uncomfortable. Maybe they don't have enough information. But listen to their no and figure out why. Why are they saying no? Is there something they don't understand? Is there something they need before that no can be a yes? Why are they saying no? And how can we support them? And sometimes it's not negotiable. When I talk to the kids, we have a lesson about sometimes we just have to accept things as what they are. And one of the examples I give is going to the dentist, because that's always been a big thing for me, is that sometimes things just are what they are. And even if we say, no, we don't want to go to the dentist, we are most likely still going to the dentist. But how can we address the fact that this child is saying no about it? What is it about this situation that's causing our kid to say no? And how can we support them and address the situation? How can we either make it to where it's not a no anymore on their part, or to accommodate them as best as possible if it's a non-negotiable situation? So saying no, in my opinion, is one of the most important skills that we can teach our kids, but it also means that we have to support them when they use it. We have to be able to recognize that when they're saying no, there is a reason that they are saying no. And what can we do to support them through that situation? So that's number one for today, is the importance of our kids being able to say no. I even see, there's so many ways that we try to support kids, whether you're a parent or a teacher, whatever your role is. There's so many things that we do as kids are growing up that we feel like are in their best interest, and then later realize that maybe it wasn't. And one of the examples that I've heard a lot is kids whose parents make them eat all their food at meals. And, I don't know that this is so much a thing anymore, but when I was growing up, it was kind of the cliche that parents would use is, there's kids starving in Africa, and you have all this food and you're choosing not to eat it. I actually remember not being allowed to leave the dining room table until I had eaten all my food. And I was a picky eater, and there were some things that I just was not going to eat. And I have very few memories of my childhood, but I have a memory of sitting at the dining room table late into the evening. Everybody else in my family had left the table, and my plate was still sitting in front of me, and I was expected to eat it before I could leave the table. And I remember the living room was to my right, and that's where the TV was. And so all I had to do was turn my head 90 degrees and I could sit and watch TV all evening. It didn't matter if I was sitting at the kitchen table or sitting on the couch. And bedtime came around and I had not eaten what was on my plate because I did not want it. I did not want to eat whatever it was. And I hear people who are now adults talk about this and how they were required to always eat what was on their plate, and how it has the potential to cause food issues. And even, I can't think of the term for it, the way that you perceive your body, just issues with weight and food, and possibly food overindulgence or food hoarding, because we grew up being told that we had to eat everything on our plate, even if you don't like it, even if you don't want it, even if you didn't ask for it, you're expected to eat everything on your plate. And so that's just one example of when our kids will sometimes say no, and how important it is to respect that no. They do not have to eat everything that's on their plate. It can actually cause some psychological challenges if that's always the requirement and the expectation. Okay. Number 2, that one was a little bit heavy because it's very personal for me. Number 2 is the ability to admit that they don't know something. So many of our neurodivergent kids really want to have a reputation for being smart. It's very prevalent in our world, having a reputation for being smart. And one of the things that gets misunderstood is that having a reputation for being smart means that you know a lot of things and that you always have an answer. And so many of our kids are uncomfortable with not knowing something. They may even make it up, right? They may say something that's not true because they don't know the actual answer. And so they might make one up. They might get really embarrassed or ashamed if they don't know something. I've had kids in Starfish Social Club who, when we're going to practice a certain skill that they don't feel that comfortable with, they will excuse themselves, and all of a sudden they have to go to the bathroom, or all of a sudden they don't feel well. Right? It's just that concept of feeling uncomfortable not knowing something. And so I'm on a mission to help my students recognize that it is okay to not know things. And it is actually how we all operate in the world. One of our lessons in the program is about how nobody knows everything and how most people actually don't like to be around people who pretend like they know everything. Most people don't like to be around people like that. And so we don't want to be that person either. We don't want to be someone who pretends like we know everything, because that does not give us a reputation for being smart. It gives us a reputation for being a smart ass when we act like we know everything. So it is always okay to not know something. And one of the ways that this shows up in Starfish Social Club, one of the ways I promote this concept, is we talk about how it is always okay to not pay attention. None of us are capable of paying attention all the time. And the kids that I work with are even less capable of paying attention all the time. And so it's really important to me to help my kids understand it is always okay to not be paying attention, which is not the general message they get most of the time. But in Starfish, that is the message they get. It is okay to not be paying attention. And so what we talk about, this actually came up this week, the week that I'm recording this. The kids who've been in Starfish for a while know this. And usually it's the kids who are newer that this is a new concept to them. And so earlier this week, we had a kiddo who we were doing an activity and everybody else had done it except for him. And so I was pretty sure that he didn't know what we were doing. I was pretty sure he had not been paying attention. And so when I told him, I'm like, okay, it's your turn, I will kind of set up the scenario to see what kids will do when they recognize they don't know what we're doing. I'll kind of set that up on purpose. So I could tell he hadn't been paying attention. I absolutely don't care. It does not matter to me at all. What I care about is that he knows how to handle that situation. Because what our kids typically do is they pretend like they were paying attention, but then they are likely to say something that doesn't even make sense. So that's what usually happens when kids pretend like they're paying attention, is if they're called on or if it's their turn, they will say or do something that doesn't make sense. And so it actually makes them stand out even more than if they were to just acknowledge that they don't know what's going on. So when I called on him, he kind of froze. And so I said, I have a feeling that maybe you don't know what we're doing. And I said, is it okay to not know what we're doing? Is it okay if you weren't paying attention? And he said, no. And so I said, group, is it okay to not pay attention? And everybody else in the group, a lot of them have been in Starfish for a while. They all said, yes, it is okay to not pay attention. So I came back to him and I said, yeah, I said, it is okay to not pay attention. We are not capable of paying attention all the time. And so I said, what can you do if you don't know what we're doing? And he did not know. And so I went back to the group. I said, group, what can you do if you don't know what we're doing? And most of the kids who have been here for a while jumped in and said, you can ask somebody. You know, you can tell stuff that you weren't paying attention. You can ask. So I was really happy to see that concept has been so reinforced in our program that the kids who've been around for a while understand that. And so you can just say, I'm sorry, I was not paying attention. Or I was distracted. I have no idea what we're doing. And all of that is totally fine, because we are incapable of paying attention all the time. And I would much rather my students let me know when they don't know what we're talking about than for them to pretend like they do. That's a coping skill that's pretty ineffective, and it actually can cause them to stand out even more, because they're likely to say or do something that does not make sense because they don't know the question or they don't know what we're doing right now. So that's how I reinforce it at Starfish Social Club. Is it's always okay to not know something. It's always okay to not be paying attention. It's always okay to not know what we're doing. It's always okay to not know. And so you can reinforce this at home as well. It's okay to not know something. If you ask your kiddo a question and they don't know the answer, reinforce that. It's totally okay to not know things sometimes. And reinforce, if we try to know everything all the time, that's when we can be kind of annoying to other people because nobody knows everything all the time. You can even, if this is a struggle for your kiddo, this could be a game. Every day, we're going to look up the answer to something that we don't know. I really love Google. I am a Google master. And so to me, if there's something I don't know, I will find the answer. But I have no problem not knowing it ahead of time. I just really like the fact that I can find the answer. So maybe every day you start the day with a question or, an event that your kiddo doesn't know about. And then at the end of the day, you guys look it up and you find the answer. So that could be a really cool way to support kiddos who feel like they need to know everything, is to turn it into a game. Every day we're going to think of something that we don't know. And then at the end of the day, we're going to learn a little bit about it. Maybe we'll spend 10 minutes learning a little bit about it. Maybe we'll watch a video about it. Maybe we'll read a story about it. So whatever it is, I think that's just a really cool way to reinforce that there's a world full of stuff that we don't know, and that it's always okay to not know things. Third thing on our list for today is the ability to ask for help. This is tied into admitting that we don't know something. Okay, these two go together really nicely, unfortunately. And I will say, asking for help is probably one of the things that I struggle the most with personally. I am a very independent person. I'm a very adventurous person. And so asking for help is very painful for me. It is like a last resort for me. I'm not really sure where all that comes from. I did read something a few days ago that was saying that it is a sign of a difficult childhood where you felt like you couldn't ask other people for help, or that there weren't people for you to ask for help. So I thought that was really interesting. But asking for help for me is very difficult. And we have a lesson on this also in our program. So part of the lesson is tied into the concept of not knowing things. Part of the lesson is that it's always okay to ask for help, and that asking for help shows that you recognize that you don't know things instead of thinking that you have to know everything. And the other part of the lesson is helping my students understand who to ask for help, when to ask for help, and how to ask for help. So one of the things that I teach is when it comes to who to ask for help, we want to ask people who can actually help in that situation. So for example, if there's something happening in math class and you're having a hard time keeping up and understanding what's going on, you can talk to mom and dad about it as much as you want to. Mom and dad would really like to hear what's going on in math class, but they are not the people who can help with what's going on in math class. And so we do an activity where it's like, who can help? That would be the math teacher, right? So you can talk to your parents about it. You can talk to your friends about it. You can talk to anybody that you choose to. But the most important person to talk to about it would be the person who can actually help with the situation. I give another example of a student who was in Starfish Social Club, and one of the games that we were playing, he did not want to play that game. And so he went home and told his mom that he did not like that game and did not want to play it. Absolutely tell your mom. Please tell your parents everything that you feel like you want to tell them. but understand that your mom's not the one who can help with that situation. I am. So in addition to telling your parents, you also need to tell me, because I'm the one who can help with that situation. If you're at work, you may be having challenges with your schedule, or you may not know how you're supposed to do something. You can absolutely talk to your other coworkers about it, but most likely your supervisor is the person who can best help you solve that problem. So that's the first part of it, is who do we ask for help? We talk about when to ask for help. Things like if we're in the middle of class, we do not want to disrupt the class to ask for help. We want to wait until the person who can help us is available to help us. Right? Our needs don't come before everybody else's needs. We're all equal. And so we wait until that person is available, so we're not disrupting the class anymore. So we ask for help when the people who are able to help us are available to help. As we get older, we can do things like sending an email and scheduling a time to talk to that person. Usually that's how things work as we get older, is that we have to communicate with that person that we need help, and then find a time that we can both sit down and talk about it. It's the same in a relationship, right? When both people are coming home from work at the end of the day, may not be the best time to have conversations about what you need from the other person. Maybe it's after dinner. Maybe it's on the weekend, right? So just keeping in mind, when is this other person available to have this conversation? And then how to ask for help. People are really likely to want to help us if we ask them in a way that is friendly and kind. I just came back from a trip in a place where the native language is Spanish. And there were a couple times where I was kind of in awkward situations and I needed help. And I always started the conversation by saying, "Can you help me?" in Spanish. Because I know that letting someone know that I need help does not make me a victim or a target. It makes them more likely to want to help me. When we say, "Can you please help me?" it makes people much more likely to be willing to help us, as opposed to if we start getting upset, or if we demand that somebody do something for us, or even, if we start having a meltdown, which we can't always avoid. But asking for help almost always makes people want to help us. And in my situation, I was asking for help in my non-native language. And I think people almost appreciated that even more. They appreciated that I was making an effort to communicate with them in their native language, because I was in their space. So asking for help, who and when and how. A couple weeks ago, I was hiking in a place I had never been before. And I lost the trail and was lost in the woods. And I was calling out. There was nobody around. I could hear deer, but there were no people around. And the challenge is that I was already a couple miles in, and I had about an hour until it started getting dark. And so I knew that if I couldn't find the trail on my own, I was going to be in trouble, because I was going to end up in the woods at night, having at least a couple miles away from, the start of the trail. And I ended up having to call 911. And she was able to track me, and she was able to tell me where to go to get onto another part of the trail, because I had gotten myself really turned around. And when I came out of the woods, the fire department had showed up and was on their way in to rescue me. So I have a picture of me with the fire department because they came to rescue me. But that was actually a hard moment for me, because I had to ask for help, and I don't like doing that. It's so uncomfortable for me. That was a hard moment. But when we ask people for help, they're almost always willing to help us. And so for me, that situation a few weeks ago, the situations that happened when I was on my trip and speaking Spanish, every time I asked for help, I got help. The people weren't always able to solve my problem. The last situation I remember, people weren't able to help me with what I needed, but they were very kind and friendly. With just having a conversation about what was going on. So I have learned that the best way to ask somebody for help is to say, can you please help me? It opens so many doors instead of telling people what we need or getting upset with people. I even had a situation with my housing, and I came back to that. I intentionally started the conversation with, can you please help me? And then I was able to tell her what was going on, and she was much more willing to try to help me than if I had just gone into her complaining about what was happening. Instead of complaining, I asked for help. The situation's the same, but instead of complaining about it, I asked for her help with it. And it made a world of difference in how she chose to handle the situation, because I wasn't coming to her with a complaint. I was coming to her asking for her help. And we as human beings really like to feel useful and really like to feel needed. And so when someone asks us for our help, it triggers something in our brain, and we want to help them as much as we can. Speaking of asking for help, I'm going to put myself out there right now, and I'm going to ask for your help. I don't ever do the whole thing where I tell people, like and subscribe and share your feedback and refer us to your friends. I don't ever do that. Number one, because I don't really care, to be honest. I can see how many people listen to the podcast. I see the emails that I get from the parents that are in our program. Our number one referral source is word of mouth. So I'm very aware of the fact that Starfish Social Club makes a difference for the kids and the families in our program. And so I don't ever ask people to, leave ratings, leave reviews, tell your friends, whatever. But I'm going to do that now. I'm going to ask for your help. If this podcast, if you find value in this podcast, this YouTube channel, if your kiddo is or ever has been in my program, if we've ever had a conversation that you found helpful, if the free resources on my website are things that you found helpful, I would love it if you would leave a review. You can leave a review on the podcast. You can like or love things on the Facebook page. You can leave a review on the Facebook page. You can leave a review on Google. Any and all of those things would really mean the world to me. And I'll share that I think we all kind of know that people are more likely to leave a review when they're unhappy than when they're happy. That's just kind of the way things work. When people are unhappy, they kind of want to share their misery, right? They want to spread it. And that's actually what's happened to me this week, is that somebody who was unhappy left a negative review on Google about Starfish Social Club, which they're absolutely entitled to do. We are all entitled to tell people our opinion on things. And so I responded to the review. If you're curious, you are more than welcome to go and see it, and you can see my response to it. The challenge is that it's the only review that we have on Google, because I don't ever ask people to review us. It's the only review we have. And so now we have a 1-star review on Google because of one person. We're going on our 8th year in business. So in 7+ years, nobody else has reviewed us on Google. And so this one person's review really has a big impact. So My ask is for you to please just take a couple minutes. I will put all the links in the show notes to our Facebook page, the Google page, where you can review the podcast. If you'll just take a couple minutes, and if anything from Starfish Social Club has been helpful or beneficial to you, your family, your child, I would really love if you would share that with other families so that they can see other people's perspectives instead of just this one person's perspective. So on that note, that was me asking for help. I hope that this was a really helpful, beneficial conversation on just the importance of our kiddos being able to say no, being able to admit that they don't know something, maybe even being comfortable admitting that they don't know something. And then also knowing when, how, and who to ask for help. You can reinforce this at home, even by doing things like when you guys go out to eat, does your kiddo order their own food? If they have a question, do you expect them to ask somebody who works in the place where you are? Or do you answer questions for them, even though you're not actually the person with the information? So it's a great way to practice asking for help, is little things like that, having your kiddo order their own food. If they have a question about something, say you're going to the video game store, have them ask the employees their questions. Have them ask about things that they don't know. Or if they ask you a question, you could say something like, who do you think we should ask that? Who do you think might know the answer to that? So just reinforcing and strengthening their ability to ask other people questions and to ask other people for help. So since recording this episode, but before publishing it, I got a notification that someone left a review on the podcast. And so I wanted to share it because this is somebody I don't know. And it's just the review just made my heart really happy. And so I wanted to share it. If you are the person who left this review, please send us an email at hello@starfishsocialclub.org. I would love to connect with you. So the review says, I wish I could claim CE credits for listening to this podcast because it's provided me with more useful information that has made me a better clinician than some formal professional talks. I've seen a change in how my patients respond to me, as well as use of tools that make more sense for many of my patients. So that's such an amazing review. That's my goal, is to be able to provide strategies and solutions that work for parents, clinicians, whatever your role may be. So I'm really glad to hear that that's what's happening. So again, if this was you, please reach out to me. I would love to connect with you. All right, that is it for this week. I am really glad that you're here, and I'll see you again next week.